Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and I'm back with another tag. But this is not so much a tag with prompts, and more an opportunity to ramble, to talk, and because I was tagged by Karen Evans in the literary adventures tag, and the one prompt for this tag is, what are some literary places that you have travelled to? Now, I'm trying to do my upfront tagging in tags at the moment, so I'm going to tag 4 splendid booktubers who are all not currently living in the place where they're originally from. So I'm hoping that'll help them bring some different ideas to this topic. But that's Brita Bohler, Jim of Books, Reading and Stuff, Tom of Tom LA Books, and Shawn the Book Maniac. So do your worst, you 4. But I have to say, when I heard this tag, Karen doing it, and realised she tagged me, I thought, one bit of me thought, this is the perfect tag for you, Roz. And another bit of me thought, but this is an impossible one for you, Roz. And I'll say why. So why is it the perfect one for me? Because it brings together 2 of the things that I most enjoy in life. I love to travel. I love to go to different places and explore and find things out. And whether that's in the UK or anywhere around the world, that I love that. And the other thing I love, as you know, is books and reading. So it combines those 2 things. But that means that any time that I travel, go somewhere other than home, I'm always on the lookout for the literary connections. And I don't just mean the sort of obvious, go to Stratford-on-Avon and visit Shakespeare's house, I suppose I dig a little deeper. Or when you're looking at a woman here who, at the age of 20, walked halfway across the Greek island in the midday sun with her friend Sarah, because we wanted to visit the grave of Rupert Brooke, the First World War poet, and we'd managed to miss the only bus. I think we might have had too much Ezo the night before. Anyway, but we did, and we visited it. I once took my happy family to the Lake District for a week, and we went around trying to find places that were locations in the Swallows and Amazon series by Arthur Ransom. That's what I like. That's what I do. My family are quite used to the fact that we might be doing a lovely walk in Cornwall, and then I'll say, I think we'll eat our sandwiches in this churchyard here, and it's like, okay, why? Because this is the church that Thomas Hardy restored when he was trying to make his living as an architect, and before he decided to become an author. That's St Juliet's in Cornwall. Yeah, it's how it works. I think I often say that I lead 2 lives, and that's my real life and the life that I'm leading in whatever book I'm currently reading. But I've realised in doing this tag that I live in 2 worlds. I live in like the real world, and a kind of overlaid over that a sort of a book world of literary connections. Yes, places where authors have come from, places that they've written about, things that are locations in books. And wherever I go, I'm always overlaying that one. Like, I was so lucky a couple of years ago to go to India, which I've always wanted to do. And my real life companion on that trip to India was the indefatigable Steve, my husband. But the companions in my head were Rohinton Mistry and Vikram Seth and Aravind Adija. They were there, or I was with them as well as him. We went to Kerala, and I had this conversation in my head with Arundhati Roy, with like, this is just how you described it in The God of Small Things. So, perfect tag for me, but too much choice. And then problem number 2 is that I live in England, and other British booktubers will understand that if they try and do this tag, that the trouble with England, well, it's a good thing, is that we've had an awful lot of writers for an awfully long time. So basically, anywhere you go, you're going to come across literary places everywhere. You know, the whole country is sprinkled in them. I just spent a week in the Malverns, and I thought I'll probably use a picture from there as the thumbnail for this, so you can see what a lovely place it is, and the kind of artistic connection most thought about with the Malvern Hills is Edward Elgar, the composer, and did see where he lived and so on, but inevitably, well, you know, there's a whole load of literary connections too. You know, like he was mates with George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, so he got Shaw to get involved in the theatre festival that he helped set up in Great Malvern, and I think about 6 of Shaw's plays had their British premiere in the theatre in Great Malvern because of his being a mate of Elgar's. C.S. Lewis, you know, Narnia and so much more. He went to school in Great Malvern. W.H. Auden, the poet, was a pupil a teacher in another school in Great Malvern, and it was while he was there that he had the magic moment when he was lying on a lawn in a night in June and had a kind of almost mystical experience and wrote a poem. Is it On a Summer's Night or A Summer's Night? I'll look it up and I'll put a link to it in the description, because being there by the Malvern Hills, that's where he had that magic moment. It's one of his loveliest poems, I think. Then, you know, while we were there, I went for some lovely walks. And one of the places we walked to was British Camp. It's an Iron Age hill fort on the hills. And of course, you know, the 17th century diarist, John Evelyn, described it, I've written down his quote, as one of England's goodliest vistas. Yeah, so I was sharing a 17th century author's appreciation of the view. And if you want to go a bit further back, William Langland when was he writing? The end of the 1300s, you know, around 1370. Yeah, he wrote this extraordinary narrative poem, Piers Plowman, English we would struggle to read now, but you know, it's this kind of same sometimes Chaucer, yeah, and that starts with Will the ploughman falling asleep in the Malvern Hills and having a dream, and the poem is like the vision from his dream, you know. Okay, so I didn't go to Malvern for any literary connection reasons, but you know, they're just there when you're anywhere in England. London, absolute nightmare for this. No, joy, not nightmare at all. You know, in the UK, we do blue plaques on buildings where famous people have lived. You know, if you live here, you'll know that. But if you're a visitor, you know, look out for the blue plaques and go and read them, because there's always something interesting. You know, so you know, if you're in Whitby, you'll see the blue plaque on the house where Bram Stoker lived, or stayed, so that he was inspired to write it into Dracula. In London, parts of London, you've got a blue plaque on every other house. Now, obviously, they're not all writers, but lots of them are. So, you know, where do you start? If you're in London, you absolutely can and should visit Dickens's house. There's a museum in one of the houses that Dickens lived in London. But you don't need to go to Dickens's house to connect with Dickens in London, because, you know, you'll just be out walking and you'll come across things, locations that appear in his books. You know, it's in the fabric of the place, I suppose. Yeah. So, if you're in the West Country, like almost any town you visit, you're going to think, oh, which Thomas Hardy novel did this one feature in? He always changes the name slightly, but you can recognise them. The Mayor of Casterbridge is set in Dorchester. You know, he sort of changes names around enough, but you can tell. So, now thinking of Thomas Hardy, that reminds me that one of the pleasures of this sort of literary exploration is going and visiting authors' birthplaces or the houses where they grew up. If you were interested in how that might have shaped them as a person. And Thomas Hardy's birthplace, Cottage, is in rural Dorset. And it's kind of in the woods, and we're used to his very expansive novels, and to realise that he grew up in what was a fairly basic cottage. I mean, it's pretty, but if you go around, you realise, this was not, it was quite crowded and quite small and a long way from anything. You had to walk miles, to get to anything. It gives you a different understanding of him, perhaps, as a writer. Even more magic, though, I think, is when you visit places where authors that you love actually did their work. I realised that as a child, not for myself, but seeing that in someone else. Now, I grew up in Kent, quite near the village of Down, and in Down House is where Charles Darwin lived, the great scientist and writer. And my father was a geneticist, and so we would sometimes have geneticists from other parts of the world would come and visit, and they'd come down to stay, or come to Sunday lunch, and then we take them to Charles Darwin's house, Down House, which they always, were quite excited about, because as geneticists, they saw him as, one of the fathers of their profession, as it were. One time, when I, little eager young child Ros, who'd been round this Down House, so many times I could do the guided tour, I'd always go along and show them around and show them my favourite bits. There was one Hungarian geneticist who'd come to stay, and you have to remember this was in the time of the Iron Curtain, when Eastern Europe was very unusual and special for someone from Hungary or Poland, whatever, to be able to come and visit the UK. And yes, this was Andrew Seisel. We took him to Down House. We were walking around Down House, and you could see he was almost trembling with excitement at being able to visit where Darwin had lived. And there's a room there that's like his study, where he worked, and it's still got his furniture and all his things, and Andrew Seisel was so visibly touched at being able to be in that room that the sort of guardian of the room, the person who was there, to keep an eye on visitors, took the rope down and took Andrew over and let him sit in Charles Darwin's chair. And he had a lot of ill health later in life, Darwin, and he used to work in a sort of quite an upright armchair with like a board across to write on. And yeah, this Hungarian geneticist was practically in tears, sitting in Darwin's chair where Darwin had written The Origin of Species. Sorry, little tickle. That moment stayed with me. How magic that was for him. And I have had the opportunity then to do a few of those kind of visits that have been as meaningful for me. And I've done them sometimes by myself, sometimes with a friend, sometimes with Steve. But the best and most wonderful I've actually done with Tilly, my daughter, of Tilly's Shelf, which won't surprise you, because she's a bookish enthusiast too. She and I went and stayed in the youth hostel in Haworth, so that we could go to the Brontes' birthplace and museum and place where they lived and wrote at Haworth Parsonage. And yeah, to be able to walk into the room where they they sat at that table, and yeah, it does give you a thrill. I think perhaps even more meaningful with the Brontes was you can walk the walk that up onto the moorland behind the village, where they love to walk, and that particularly inspired Emily Bronte in Wuthering Heights. But also, you get that in Charlotte Bronte as well, don't you? In Jane Eyre, that walking that countryside was really important to them, and it does add something. Everything that you need is in the words, is in the book, but that connection is yeah, it's a thrill, isn't it? You can probably guess that the author that Tilly and I really gone to town on in terms of visiting things to do with where they worked and located places that they lived and places that they used to inspire their novels. It's Jane Austen, of course it is. You can visit the house at Chawton, where she lived for the sort of latter part of her life, and you can go in, and it's got her little kind of sloping writing. It's not really a writing desk, it's like a kind of a box that you kind of put on a table and write on. Her that where she actually, oh yes, wonderful. And the creaky door that she deliberately left creaky so that if someone came through it, she could quickly tuck her work away, because she was quite private about her writing, beyond her own family, until it was published. We've also been to the house she lived in Bath, to the house she died in when she was living in Winchester, her grave in Winchester Cathedral, Lyme Regis, to look at the place where the Cobb, where the famous fall scene happens in Persuasion, to her brother's houses, his house in Chawton, which has an amazing women's library in it now, worth a visit when you're there. The two houses in Kent that were more like the models for the big houses in she'd go and stay almost like as the poor auntie, looking after her brother's children, but those were the houses that appear in Pride and Prejudice and Emma, and so yeah. I'm going to stop going on because I'm over enthusing about this, and I could literally talk about places I've visited with literary connections for about 24 hours on the trot. So this is, I will stop with thought of all those lovely places I've been with Tilly in connection with Jane Austen. But please do if you're coming to the UK and you want places to visit, do ask me for recommendations. I'll assume if you're a bookish person and you live here that you know them already, and do the tag if you fancy it, even if I didn't tag you.